Robert Crane, who was an advisor to the President of United States of America, Richard Nixon, and was Deputy Director for Planning of United States National Security Council. He has authored and co-authored more than a dozen books and over professional articles on comparative legal systems, global strategy, and information management. Dr. Crane's entire career has focused on role of think tanks in managing paradigms of thought as a key of artificial intelligence, starting in 1966 and 69 as a director of Third World Studies in Hudson Institute, where he monitored the Soviet Union's advanced work on artificial intelligence as a key to future world. Dr. Crane has been the chairman of Center for Understanding Islam and Muslims, which has produced four-volume textbook, Islam and Muslims, Essence and Practice, since its founding 2001. The World Muslim Communities Council is happy to host this lecture, which will illustrate his unique and fascinating journey in Islam. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Robert Crane, please.
Shukran. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum kulikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I was asked for this interview to describe my path to Islam, but I decided that doesn't describe me at all, because I have always been a Muslim from the day I was born. I don't have a path to it, I have a path within it. And so the question then is, what does it mean to be a Muslim? Well, I can give you the background of how I became a Muslim practically as soon as I was born, or I should say, as soon as I was born. Two events occurred in my early life. The first one was I was 18 months old, and my grandmother, who was helping to raise me, took me over to a place where wayward girls were put. Back then, if a girl had problems, she was banished from society. So they would put her in a special house. And so my grandmother dropped me off there with these girls, and they were going to take care of me for the day. And I liked that. I liked beautiful girls, even at the age of 18 months, apparently. But they told me, I had a cardboard train, a little cardboard train. And, I liked that very much. It was my toy. And they told me, don't take this outside. Well, I figured, I think I will take it outside and see what happens. So I took it outside, and I couldn't even walk then, apparently. I crawled out with my little train and dragged it down the front steps, and the train was torn apart. And I was so angry. I've never been so angry in my entire life. Angry at myself for disobeying them and destroying my little cardboard train. So I cried and cried and cried. And I remember crying. I've never done anything like that before or since. They were trying to, help me to stop crying. And the more they tried, the more I tried to cry even harder. Eventually they left, and then that was the end of it. So that was my first experience. Should you pay attention to others who have experience and can advise you on what is best for the future? And at that point, I decided, I violated that principle, and maybe I should not in the future ignore the traditional wisdom of other people. The second major event in my life was at the age of 8, when the kids in the neighborhood walked to school along a road which passed by a house where Jews lived. The only Jews within miles, as far as I know, of where we lived. And the rumor spread that these people ate 5 meals a day. And we all knew that is terrible. You're supposed to eat 3 meals a day. So all the kids, instead of walking by their house, they crossed the street, walked past their house along the other side, and then back to the sidewalk. Well, I thought that's ridiculous. So I walked past the house, and their name was Rose. And, they looked like nice people. Why shouldn't I walk past without going across the street? But either that night or the following night, I was out in the back of our house at night and looking at the stars. I love to look at the stars. Anything that was so unlimited that you couldn't define it. And there's no way to count the stars in the sky. I like numbers too. I don't know, when I was 4, I could count up to 500. And because numbers are infinite. Well, while I was lying there and contemplating the heavens, as I like to do, suddenly about 20 kids barged into our backyard and were obviously going to beat me up. And I had no idea what was going on. I had no problems with them, I thought. But I jumped up and ran into the house and made it just before they got me. So then I learned that pursuing justice for all people can be dangerous for people who have their own version of justice or don't care about justice, which is the majority opinion, probably. So these two experiences when I was young, taught me that one of the major issues for anybody is defining traditionalism. To what extent should you pay attention to the tradition of the past, your own culture? To what extent should you be free of it? To be aware of Allah and the way that Allah allows and translate that into justice. Now, 20 years ago, I developed a policy. I've developed the Center for Policy Research as a think tank, which focused on fundamental issues of principled issues. And the title here is Projecting Islamic Vision for America, policy paper number 1, January 2000. My new Center for Policy Research was a product of an unresolved conflict between two visions. It addressed this conflict. The first vision prioritized order by seeking justice within the orderly governmental system of the British Empire. The second prioritized the demand for justice by seeking freedom from traditional order. A compromise was later developed in America through what has been known as traditionalism. And I can quote from one paragraph from this initial policy paper. The basic paradigm of traditionalist thought is that order, justice, and freedom are interdependent. When freedom is construed to be independent of justice, there can be no justice, and the result will be anarchy. When order is thought to be possible without justice, there can be no order, because injustice is the principal cause of disorder. And when justice is thought to be possible without order and freedom, then the pursuit of order, justice, and freedom are snares of the ignorant. As pointed out also in this first policy paper, every person has I'm quoting, every person has three choices when faced with the injustices that are inevitable in every society. The first is to rebel as an outsider, which automatically renders this person irrelevant to any process of constructive change. The second is to assimilate and become part of the problem, which most people do. The third is to transform the society in which one lives by first transforming oneself. So to address this in this current, celebration of Ramadan, we should I think a good idea to close and then go to questions and answers, so that we have more time for question and answers. And by noting policy paper number one's further recommendation that the path of transformation consists of two parts: order in the soul and order in society. A much quoted verse of the Quran reads, "Verily, Allah does not change a people's condition until they change what is in their inner selves," unquote. In other words, political and social panaceas are ideological delusions, because true transformation of the world is possible only on an individual basis. Now, these three quotes that I just gave have been important in all my thinking ever since I violated wisdom by taking my train outside, and ever since I violated the standard procedures that consider that anybody who did anything different from myself was not really human. So as I've been emphasizing in recent years, there are three strategies to fulfill our purpose on earth. The first is the Benedict option, following the example of Saint Benedict in response to the occupation of the Roman Empire by the Goths in the latter part of the 4th century, Christian century. This was to protect the wisdom of the past embodied in Christianity by retreating into monasteries until the time arrives to restart civilization. The second of these three strategies is the Franciscan option. I once was a third order Franciscan monk when I lived in Japan and used to visit the monastery every morning. There were Franciscan monks there, German Franciscan monks. This was in 4 years after the Second World War. Only Germans were permitted to, German monks were permitted to be in Japan during the Second World War. So the second Franciscan option that I learned from them is to go out into the highways and byways of the world and preach the good word from every housetop. The Islamic option, unlike either of those two, following the example of the Quranic option of freedom, which is for individuals to choose what they can do best so that every person, every nation, and the society as a whole can best fulfill its transcendent purpose. This is the Islamic option. And the extent to which one can do this, I think, would determine the extent to which one should be called a Muslim. Now, there are several follow-up questions that I think would answer what Abbas was really interested in, which is my own experiences in life rather than my conclusions. And so I should ask him to ask some of these questions. So it's up to you, inshallah.
Thank you so much for this brief talk on yourself, especially the journey. And I think we will start with, your journey to Islam, before we talk about journey in Islam. It will be interesting for our viewers to know, how was that real journey started? In which year?
Well, I would say that my first experience as an adult, the most important one was spending a year in Germany in 1948 on leave from Harvard, where I was a student, at the University of Munich. And I wanted to write, and did, but I never published, a book entitled The Transcendent Purpose of Resistance Against a Totalitarian State, because it made no sense to try to overthrow a totalitarian state. Totalitarian states, once established, can be overthrown only from within, not from without. And so I went across the border between West and East Germany to join the underground, sort of, you might call that field work, in how to overthrow a totalitarian state. And of course, I was almost immediately captured and put in prison. And this was Stalin's Gulag archipelago. But the most important thing I learned there is that if one's awareness of God is strong enough, and one's awareness of the very concept of absolute truth, and if one was created free, then one cannot be imprisoned. The highest degree of freedom can be experienced inside a prison. And that influenced me considerably, because basically that was my answer to how people should be acting as Muslims. This also taught me something about Islam at that time, only as a political movement in the United States. And I was, all during the 1960s, I was Richard Nixon's principal expert on foreign policy. I had written a 50-page article in Orbis evaluating the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which I said that the communists, the Soviet Union, won hands down. All they wanted was to deter us from invading Cuba. And all they had to do was move missiles into Cuba and then offer to withdraw them if we would promise not to invade Cuba. So that was the deal. And the Soviets won, hands down. So Richard Nixon was moving from California to join his law firm, moving to New York to head a law firm. And he spent the entire plane ride reading this 50-page article. And when he landed, he called me. And he said, "This is Richard Nixon." And I thought it was my brother-in-law who was just kidding. So I said, "Oh, hi, Mr. Richard Nixon. I'm King Crane of Illinois." I thought of saying that, but in the last second, I decided not to. It turned out it was Nixon. And he asked me to work together with him in writing a book on foreign policy. And I had just gotten a grant to write a book on paradigms of thought and think tanks and so forth, as part of getting a degree at Oxford. I already had a degree from Harvard Law School, but I wanted to get another degree from Oxford. And so I turned him down, but he hired me as his head of foreign policy, hired Pat Buchanan as his head of domestic policy. And shortly before the 1968 election, I was urging Nixon to run for the presidency, and he didn't want to. He said he's an elder statesman, but I used to go into his office regularly, and I saw Pat Nixon addressing Christmas cards, and I said, "I know what you're doing. The boss," we call him the boss, "has decided to run." And she said, she didn't say anything for a while. And I said, he's going to run, isn't he? And she said, yes. And it's going to be terrible. And I said, what do you mean? And she wouldn't answer. But I realized later she knew that there were two sides of Richard Nixon, two sides of Pat Rumsfeld, two sides of a lot of people. One is an angel, and the other is the opposite. One is seeking truth and justice, and the other is seeking power. And so Nixon then asked me shortly before the election. Well, I wrote a whole book, 50, each one 50-page position papers, which was going to be published as a book. But I was told it's better not to publish it because everything you say is the exact opposite of what Henry Kissinger thinks. Kissinger said, the purpose of American foreign policy is power. And I said, no, the purpose of American policy is to become a model of justice, peace and justice. Well, so Nixon said, come up with some really new blockbuster idea on which I can run. And I didn't have anything to offer. Blockbuster idea. I had a lot of ideas. Well, Kissinger came up with a brilliant strategy. Our principal enemy in the world was communism, Soviet communism. And our principal ally in the world against Soviet communism could be Chinese communism. So that's what Kissinger said. And he flew over there, and that started a whole new foreign policy. It was very clever. If your goal is power, you work together with anybody who can promote your power. And if you can make a communist country an ally against another communist country, then do it. So this was another lesson that was taught, the real difference between seeking power and seeking justice. But I should say that the most important event, practice in my entire life in deciding what my purpose is in life was the wisdom that I was taught by my great-grandmother. See, my grandmother helped take care of me for a while, and my great-grandmother helped take care of me for a while. My parents were divorced, and there's nowhere for me to go, so I landed with my grandparents. And my great-grandmother spoke Cherokee as her native religion. She belonged to the Cherokee Nation, which emphasized principles, emphasized the derivation of truth, the existence of ultimate truth, and its derivation from awareness of God, Allah. They called him Allah. When you start a prayer in Cherokee, traditional Cherokee, you say Ya Allah. And this fascinated me because they had a very well-developed system of principles of responsibilities, principles of human rights that result from observing one's responsibilities. And this made complete sense to me. And then, my great uncle, with whom I lived in Hillsborough, Indiana, where there are two Cherokee groups that lived. He went down to Oklahoma. I guess he learned some Cherokee from his mother, and spent 2 years studying the Cherokee traditional religion. And he became a religious leader. And then President Roosevelt, not the Franklin Delano, but the earlier one, abolished formally abolish the Cherokee religion and the Cherokee government as uncivilized, barbaric, because he said the essence of civilized law is to maintain order. And the Cherokee religion does not emphasize maintaining order. It emphasizes principles that may have nothing to do with order. And so he said, they are uncivilized. They're not entitled to have a religion or a government. And I thought this was monstrous. But my great uncle escaped from prison and spent the next 2 years, 1905 to 1907, trying to organize all the indigenous nations of America, the First Nations, to demand freedom of religion and freedom of self-government. And he went to the Navajos and spent some time there, and they said, sorry, but we've been defeated. You know, there's really nothing we can do anymore. They've put us on a reservation here, and there's nothing we can do. So then he went to the Hopis, and the Hopis said, yes, we can survive. We can enjoy our own religion and our own self-government in secret. We won't tell them what our religion is. So then he went up to the Crow, and the Crow also said, we've been defeated. So then he went up to the Blackfeet in Montana and spent a whole year there because they wanted to support him. But after a year, they gave up too. And they said, sorry, there's nothing we can do. So he came home, and I knew him there, and he was defeated, but he decided to keep the religion secret. And I didn't know much about the religion until my grandmother, when she was 96, took me aside and told me, you may be the last one who represents the Cherokee religion. I want to tell you some things. So she did. And she indicated that, well, she was a Christian. She had converted to Christianity. But my great uncle had remained a Muslim. I mean, he kept it secret, so people wouldn't know that, I guess, that he's a Muslim. The Jews said that all that the Cherokee religion shows about Islam really was inherited from the Jews, because they didn't want to believe that that Islam could produce independent religions in America. At any rate, but this taught me that the essence of every religion is awareness of Allah. But the essence of every religion also is to develop from this awareness of Allah a search for truth, knowing that there is such a thing as absolute truth. The whole universe is one aspect of it. And that we can fulfill our purpose to carry out these principles of truth by developing them in a legal system. And this is what the Cherokees did. Well, so this is my approach to law. And I applied to Harvard Law School to study this, and also to Oxford, and they both accepted me. But people advised me, you can't use what you learn at Oxford in practicing law. Well, I really didn't want to practice law. I wanted to study philosophy and justice. But I went to Harvard anyway. And there I learned the exact opposite of everything I had thought and learned my entire life. The very first class at Harvard, there were 500 students, only 2 girls, and Justice Ginsburg sat behind me, in property class. I guess he must have been the deputy dean, asked everybody a question. He said, I want to ask you a question. This is your first formal study at Harvard Law School. If you were driving along a road in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the night, and there were no cars anywhere, but there was a stop sign at an intersection, would you stop? Well, just about everybody raised their hand. Of course we'd stop. There's a sign, says so. So then he said, and how many of you would not stop? I raised my hand, and so did two other kids. So this taught me that I'm not going to learn anything useful here, but I like to finish what I start. So I did finish, but I organized the Harvard International Law Society and started its International Law Journal in my last year. This caused a ruckus because I was teaching in the exact opposite of case law. Case law is when a lawyer wins his case by showing that some other judge earlier in similar circumstances has judged the way you want him to. In other words, the dead past can rule over the dynamic present, even though the context is different in both space and time. And of course, I would say, no, if we're talking about basic principles, they have to be applied creatively and often newly to meet the needs of changed time and space. I've been trying to teach this through think tanks. I spent most of my life in think tanks, and most of my own think tanks. Twice I've had multi-billionaires funding me, and each time the multi-billionaire dies, one had a second failed in transplant, liver transplant. But I've never been able to persuade Muslims what a think tank is designed to do. A think tank is not designed to change policy. There was one group of Pakistanis, and 50 of them promised to give me $1,000 if I would stop whatever the bill was the bill was to stop. Well, now I've forgotten. No, I think the bill was to provide military aid to Pakistan for internal stability. And I said, well, you're 4 years too late. If you want to change American policy towards Pakistan, you have to start 3 or 4 years earlier developing an approach, a paradigm, a system of thought to evaluate why you want to fund the domestic military in Pakistan. They didn't understand what I was talking about, because what they read is the newspapers, and they read, what goes on in Congress. But they were not aware that policy is made to a large extent from think tanks. The think tanks develop the agendas. The politicians apply the agendas. Whoever wins out in providing the agenda wins. But the think tanks themselves are not the ultimate source of public policy. The ultimate source are universities, because the universities study the paradigms of thought. Whoever can control the paradigms controls the think tanks, and the think tanks control the policymakers. Similarly, whoever can control the paradigms used in artificial intelligence will control the result of artificial intelligence, and in turn, the policies that will be adopted, and even the thinking of human beings. Well, this is pretty far out thinking for most people. It has helped for people to take artificial intelligence seriously, which I always have ever since I knew during the 1950s, where I studied Soviet intensive work on artificial intelligence, half a century before most people took it seriously. I did immediately because I'm a long-range global forecaster. Actually, that is my major profession, long-range global forecasting of everything in the future. But especially the dynamics of ontology, which is, call it the science of ultimate reality, epistemology, which is the science of translating what understanding what can get from that into principles of law, jurisprudence, and axiology, which is the it's the science of action, the science of taking these principles and putting them into action. And this is the principal task of think tanks, which has been my principal interest all my life. But if I look back, my wife says, you've spent your life trying to save the world. You haven't been interested in saving us. Now, what have you achieved? and I say, well, I don't know, but maybe 100 years from now, somebody will find some of my articles like Projecting Islamic Vision for America and try to do the same thing and maybe be more successful than I've been. So I think this would answer a lot of your questions for this.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's very illustrious and fascinating. Some of them are very new things for our viewers and even to the world. And moreover, now we have some more confusion, or we need some more detailed idea on Cherokees, because you told that your journey was you were not accepting Islam, you born and you realized later, So could you give some more idea on how Cherokees reached in United States and how their links to there from Africa, all the things?
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is actually the subject of a 2-volume history that Sister Samira Saidi has started. And she read an article that I wrote 20 years ago about, I should have brought a copy with me, on, I'm trying to remember the title, but it's fulfilling the Cherokee vision as guidelines for the great American experiment in freedom, justice, and, well, I'm back on ontology. But instead of starting with order, justice, and freedom, I start with freedom, justice, and order. And the Cherokee religion, as I said, emphasizes, above all, awareness of absolute, well, of the absolute beyond everything that can be defined. We were created with an awareness of that. It's our fitra, to be aware of that and to seek it. As a matter of fact, I would say that our purpose, each person's purpose in life is unique. And the major job of every person is to try to seek what one's unique purpose is. And then, and to seek it in terms of promoting justice in the world. And then to, by acting on this, to become the person that one was created to be. So you then become what you are, what you already are. You have, and every person has a unique identity. Our job is to find out what it is and then become that person. And I think the same applies to to a whole community of people, a nation like the Cherokees. And of course, what Samira has uncovered is an entirely new historical perspective, which is now rapidly becoming accepted by scholars everywhere, that the Arabs, long before Columbus discovered America, routinely traded economically with the peoples of America, both North and South America. Not only did they travel regularly in trade, they also settled in both North and South America. The greatest settlement, she's studying all these settlements that now are very clear. The Cherokee tradition, religious tradition, which I think some people wanted to keep secret, I think maybe it's time not to keep it secret, is that the Cherokee religion came from a great fleet of ships, which landed when the Cherokees lived on an island where it never got cold. And it came in the form of a book. And the tradition says further, see, I belong to the Aniwaya clan. They're one of 7 clans among the Cherokees. The Aniwaya is responsible for the heritage and the religion. And other clans, one is the businessman, one was the military, one is the judicial, but the heritage is called the Wolf Clan, Aniwaya. The Mali Empire sent a great fleet of ships, two great fleets, 1310, 1312. There's no evidence of whether they landed back in Mali, but Samira is finding evidence that they knew. But what happened, according to the Cherokees, is that the bad Indians from the south, which would be the Caribs, they destroyed everything in the Gulf of Mexico. All the islands, they just destroyed everything they could. So the Cherokees fled, and the Cherokees fled to the Great Land. Well, we're not supposed to interpret their tradition because we might have our own interpretations and distort it, but I interpret it anyway. And my interpretation is that they landed in the Yucatan Peninsula, where the Mayans, the Mayans lived, because the Mayans had a very advanced civilization, just like the Arabs from Africa. Arabs and Africa, the Black Africans who were accepted in a confederation in the Mali Empire. There was no discrimination based on color or anything else. It was a model confederation. And the Cherokees developed they came from this federation. They applied the same wisdom when they landed in the Yucatan. But then the bad Indians came again and tried to destroy them. So then they fled. This is according to the Aniwaya tradition. They fled in order to find the book. And they fled to the north, up to the mouth of the Mississippi River. Some of them reportedly, I didn't know this from the Aniwaya, but some of them went all the way up to the Mississippi River to Wisconsin. Most of them turned then east because they wanted to find the book. They knew it came out of the east, and they bumped into the Atlantic Ocean, couldn't go any further. But they had this reputation as a very advanced culture. They knew they did, but they lost the ability to read. The Quran was destroyed, and the scholars who knew the Quran eventually died. But they knew the history. And when the first Europeans landed, the Cherokees had several large towns, thousands of people, two-story brick buildings, a very advanced judicial and governmental system. And the first thing that the young people did when they saw the Europeans was to send their young men to England to study law, because they knew that the Europeans respected law, and so did the Cherokees. So they wanted to understand what makes these foreigners from the East intelligible. We have to study their laws. And actually, when I forget names now. Andrew Jackson, yeah. When President Andrew Jackson, or was it Andrew? Yeah. Any rate, he wanted to get rid of the Cherokees. He also, like future presidents, decided that they were savages and had no right to live. So the Chief Justice John Marshall, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States and probably our greatest Chief Justice, declared that the Cherokees' right to sovereignty was higher than the right of the people in Georgia to sovereignty. So wherever the Cherokees lived in Georgia and North Carolina, some in Tennessee, they were not like the states of the United States. They had a higher level of sovereignty. Well, Andrew Jackson, flipped when he when he heard that. So he called the Chief Justice over to the White House and he said, "Mr. Chief Justice, I want to ask you a question. Do you have your own army?" And the Chief Justice said, "No, of course not, Mr. President. You know that." And he said, "Well, I do. And the Cherokees are going." So he chased them out a few years later. He chased them out to beyond the frontier because nobody lived out there, and just chased these savages out to where they belong. And in the middle of the night, they were chased out there, and supposedly a third of them died. This was in the middle of the winter. But 3 groups fled, fairly large groups, because they thought they would be killed once they arrived in Oklahoma. And 1 went to Ohio and 2 went to Indiana. And one of those groups in Indiana was my group, the Heritage. And that's why my great-grandmother, who spoke Cherokee as her native language, was born in Oklahoma, but she then was sent up to the Shoemakers, who were one of the principal families in both Oklahoma and wherever the Cherokees were. There's another group that fled, and I didn't know until recently that this other group maintained the religion. My group pretty much lost it. They became Christianized. Although the people who impressed me were still practiced the Cherokee religion every year until 1895, according to my grandmother, when she was telling me secrets that some people don't want you to know. The Cherokees came from Oklahoma to celebrate the Hajj up in Hillsboro, Indiana. And I'm the only person alive who still knows where the Hajj was. It's an ideal location. Nobody could ever find it. But in 1895, the Hillsboro group had been Christianized so much that, and some of them wanted to join the Hajj, even though they were Christians. So the Cherokees, the 2 groups together passed a law that permission to join the Hajj, which had all the ceremonies, was given only to people who were fluent in Cherokee. And the other group I have to talk with, we just discovered recently that my great-grandfather, who married my great-grandmother, whose native language was Cherokee. He was more Cherokee than she was, and he came from the other group, John Dunham Beaver. I want to talk with these people because I used to live there in Hillsborough, right on the border between Hillsborough and Petersburg, which is the border between the two Cherokee groups. And I think it's probably good. I'm still wondering about it, whether the true history should be brought out or whether it should continue to be secret. As you know about, I was supposed to write a long article for a book on matrilinealism, but particularly on the culture of the Cherokees. I decided that maybe I'm not ready to divulge what many Cherokees think should be kept secret. I know when I was Nixon's personal advisor, principal advisor in Native American affairs, and then became head of, I was the ombudsman in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, in charge of handling, of solving insoluble problems, because all the problems were insoluble. And so I'm sensitive. Well, I talk to the traditionalists down there. Normally, you cannot contact them. They're secret. They live in Arkansas primarily. But when I went to there was a board meeting for the whole tribe, and somebody came up to me and said, "Please come with me. I want to drive you to Arkansas to meet with the traditionalist Cherokees." And so I did. And he said, "Don't believe anything you read in all these academic books about the Cherokees. It's all a bunch of bullshit. When these scholars, supposed scholars, come to interview us, we tell them these outlandish things about our religion. None of them are true, but we don't want them to know our religion. So they think our religion is nonsense, and what they know of it is nonsense." Now, I would like people to know that it's not nonsense, but the only way to know that is to explain what it is. And I've decided I really should, but I want to spend another couple of years working with Samira on this 2-volume textbook on, well, I call it the world's greatest historiographical revolution. The Europeans think that history started with them. In fact, entire civilizations existed long before the European civilizations, existed even before the Roman civilization, even the Greek civilization. There were people from southern Arabia, who gave much of what the Greeks supposedly developed to them. And of course, the Romans took what they could from the Greeks, and then the Europeans took what they could from the Romans. But a lot of that descends from Arabs. But this is kept secret among the Europeans, because they want to claim that they were the first civilized people on Earth. They ignore the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Confucians. They don't count. But certainly nothing that comes from the Arabs amounts to anything. That's the gospel in modern academic thought. Just like the gospel at Harvard Law School is that there is no such thing as a principle of law.
Thank you so much, and I hope you will bring the book soon. Especially the Chronicle of Cherokees. The world will get a real history. And when we come to, because we were talking about journey to Islam, when we come to the journey in Islam, how your concept of justice that helped in your journey in Soviet Union, Germany, maybe in part of India, Japan, another part of these Arab world, how it was influencing.
How what?
the justice, because you took Islam as a
Oh,
means of
yeah.
justice.
Oh, how did I learn justice from this experience?
This experience, because you became a Muslim, journey in Islam, and you were journeying
Okay,
within
yeah,
countries,
yeah,
you were
all right.
engaging with these countries.
Yeah, when did I realize that I am a Muslim? Even though I was a Muslim all along, when did I realize that? This occurred in 19, well, first I should say, I studied Islam when I was advising Richard Nixon and when I was deputy director for planning in the National Security Council for a very short period before Kissinger fired me. I studied Islam because I told Nixon that the only really powerful force in the world against communism, other than Western Europe, the United States, is Islam, because the communists are secular. They worship themselves. They want to control the world, and by doing that, they want to impose themselves as the ultimate power, as God. There's nothing more powerful than that against totalitarian secularism. And I said the United States has to choose between justice, pursuing justice as a model for the world, and pursuing just plain power in order to conquer the world. They're two diametrically opposite approaches. And I said the ultimate power actually is justice over the long run. So I was familiar with Islam, but I didn't, think of myself as a Muslim until I read the book. What was his name? By the chief imam of the big mosque in Geneva, Switzerland, who married the daughter of Hassan al-Banna, the original founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, who was a Sufi, by the way, even though the Qutbians, the Sayyid Qutb extremists in the Muslim Brotherhood, rejected that. But so this imam wrote this book in Islamic law, titled Islamic Law. And he showed that Islamic law is a set of higher principles. Maybe I should go into those. I mean, see, there's several arrangements of the higher principles in the Maqasid al-Sharia. The original 5 by al-Ghazali were followed for many years, but there were always scholars who added to them. Actually, the last major addition was by, he was the chief imam in Tunisia, wrote a book in 1946 on Islamic law. And then, of course, the imam 100 years later wrote, I think, a classic book on Islamic law, outlined these principles. Now, if we have time for this, I can maybe quickly outline the 8 principles that I think follow most easily from the Quran. If we use critical thought in trying to understand the purpose behind the revelations in the Quran, if you look at it in terms of purpose, it's very clear that the Quran is an absolute miracle, because everything, it's all interrelated, intersupported. The nazm of the Quran, which is the internal meaning of the Quran, which must be understood in order to apply it. Well, I developed 8 principles, 8 maqasid, or kuliyat, or dururiyat. Kuliyat means universal, dururiyat, the essentials, the essence. And incidentally, this essence, I think, is really the same in every other world religion. It's almost part of human nature. Well, the first one is haq al-yaqeen. Haq is a wonderful word in Arabic, like many words in Arabic. It has many meanings. Haq means God. Haq means ultimate truth. Haq means, well, let's see. It means God and it means ultimate truth, the two major meanings. So Haqq-ad-Din is the first of the eight. It's the first of the first four. The first four provide guidance for the last four. The last four are action oriented. So Haqq-ad-Din is awareness of Allah. That comes from the Quran, throughout the Quran. And that is also common to all the religions, but not as purely. The second one is Haqq-an-Nafs, which is the respect for the sacredness of the individual person, because the individual person comes from God and therefore is sacred. And the third is Haqq-an-Nasl, which is respect. These are all respect for the sacredness of human community, from the nuclear family to the call it the group Asabiya, the nation, the nation being, by my definition, a large group of people who share the same heritage, the same values in the present, and the same hopes for the future. In Western international law, nations do not exist, because in the law taught at Harvard Law School, legitimacy belongs only to whoever can control more than 50% of a given territory. There is 100% diametrical opposite between the international law developed in 1648 at the Treaty of Westphalia, which justified imperialism, namely whoever has material power is legitimate. The Haqq-an-Nasl is the opposite. Whichever group has a sense of its own heritage, a sense of its own values, and a sense of hopes for its own future is legitimate. So that's the third one. The fourth one is Haqq-an-Mahid, which is respect not just for the sacredness of the individual group, but for the respect for the sacredness of the entire earth, because we can't live without it. And it's the greatest gift that Allah has given us. Now, these four are guiding principles.
Thank you.
The last four, and we don't have time to go into that, I'm sure, but just quickly, the last four are Haqq-al-Mal, which is respect for economic democracy. Haqq-al-Mal is wealth. It's respect for economic democracy, meaning that there's equal opportunity for every person to acquire investments in productive wealth. So you might say, well, President Reagan developed this at great length, and I worked on it for 2 years at Presidential Task Force on Economic Justice. He said the secret to communism is to make sure that everybody is a capitalist. So that's, in my view, that is Islamic. Haqq-al-Mal. Haqq-al-Hurriya is the second one. These are action principles. What do you do? The Haqq-al-Hurriya consists of 3 subcategories. There are various categories, from very principle to very specific. Khilafah is the highest in Haqq-al-Hurriya. Khilafah is what you might say the principle of a republic. The highest leader's ultimate authority does not come from them, it comes from God. The highest authority for all human beings politically is not themselves, human beings, it's Allah. And the next one is Shura, the obligation of the rulers and the ruled to consult with each other so that they can work together. And the third one is Ijma, the consensus of the, I guess you would call them the de facto leaders in society. who should be elected in a democratic process. But once they're elected, their prime responsibility is to God, not to the people who elected them. They should be elected so that they will recognize that the ultimate authority to legitimacy comes from God, not man. Okay, and the third one is haka karama. Let's say that from the tradition, that means respect for honor. I say it means most particularly respect for gender equity, which is something that is, I hope, gradually becoming possible among Muslims. And the fourth one is haka ilm, which is haka ilm is better. Respect for free speech, free publication, free assembly, and respect for all the other maqasid intellectually, because these are all interdependent. No single one can be applied adequately without all the others. And so this is my definition, and this is, as I have studied it, this is exactly what the Cherokees were saying. And they're supposed to be savages.
Thank you so much for this explanation. I have one more question that, you talk about these wisdoms and also peace and this justice, how it will affect, or how it will be applicable, to eradicate the extremism, terrorism, and all kind of these trends,
Oh, okay, pluralism you're talking about, yeah.
No, just I'm talking about you were working for the peace, you were working for justice, that's the main idea in the Maqasid Sharia you mentioned, and how it will be, how it can eradicate the terrorism and extremism.
Say that again,
how it can develop coexistence and peace.
How does this relate to peace? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, peace.
Okay. Well, I would say in this case, these principles must be recognized as universal, and we should look for these principles in other religions as the essence of other religions. And I might tell you, one of the most valuable experiences in my life that shaped my life was in 1982. I was already a Muslim, but people didn't know it. I was a secret Muslim. And I was invited to found a Native American monastery in Baca, Colorado, by, what was his name? He was a Canadian billionaire. He wanted to have a village. Every major religion would have a monastery, and they would work together peacefully. And I was asked to head the Native American monastery. And so I arrived, and shortly after I arrived, 2 Buddhist monks came from Dharamsala, India. And the head of this outfit, of this would-be village, asked me to entertain them for 5 minutes because they had to go into the little village. This is on the west slope of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Had to go into the little village to buy supplies. So I went up to them and I said, I understand you'll have to wait for 5 minutes before the bus will take you downtown. Can you explain to me in 5 minutes what Buddhism is? And they laughed. And I told them that I'm representing the Native Americans. We want to know what Buddhism is. And so they told me, Buddhism consists first of Hinayana Buddhism. Hinayana Buddhism is to rule your unruly self. It emphasizes what we would call Ramadan in Islam. If you can't control yourself, you can't do anything else. And once you've mastered that, then we have Mahayana Buddhism. And Mahayana Buddhism, at that level, you have direct awareness of the ultimate. The ultimate cannot have a name because a name restricts whatever it's naming. So we have no name for it. There can't be a name, but it's awareness of what you call what you call God. And the Cherokee also use the word Allah. And once you are proficient in that, then we have Tantrayana Buddhism, which is Tibetan Buddhism. And in Tibetan Buddhism, your great desire is to bring compassionate justice to everyone in the world. And I said, mashallah, you have just defined Islam more perfectly than I've ever heard. So if the Buddhists, the enlightened Buddhists who are critical of their own religion, critical of their own thinking, of the superficiality of many of their members, and then the Muslims can do the same thing, there will be peace. But the problem with particularly Muslims, I think, more than other relations come from tolerance. We must tolerate other people. Well, the communists talked about that coexistence. Tolerance means coexistence. We coexist. But coexistence purpose is eventually to destroy your enemy. And so with this background from communism, I am horrified when Muslims talk about tolerance. We will tolerate other people. Well, tolerance can be a strategy to destroy them.
But in Arabic, Arabic, there is a very beautiful word, wasatiya, It has got a very high definition meaning.
The Arabic word, yes, means more than what the superficial people are saying it means. Yeah, we should use the Arabic word and then define it. Not use the word tolerance.
Because English don't have a word for that.
There are three levels.
Yeah.
There's tolerance, that's at the bottom. The next level is diversity. Diversity means we accept you. We're not going to just tolerate you. We accept you. So, let's be peaceful. But there's a higher level. And that's pluralism. And pluralism requires peaceful engagement, not peaceful cooperation, but peaceful engagement. We will actively work together to promote the essence of all religions and thereby develop peace among ourselves. I've been trying to get this across to Muslims for, ever since I met the Buddhist monks. but I haven't gotten very far.
Thank you so much, because I'm sure that it was a very illustrious explanation from the empirical life of you, these are very unique things, and we got a remarkable experience you shared. I think we'll have more chances in Abu Dhabi, just like last time, when the world gets back.
Well, I want to thank you, and I admire you because you've been so active from maybe a model for the entire world in Kerala, where four of the more major religions have been working together for centuries.
Yeah,
there's no other place like that.
Now, newly, you can see that Abu Dhabi is also bringing all religion together.
Yes.
New accord, and then all these things. It's a very good sign for the world.
The UAE is another model, also a model of confederalism, like the Mali Empire. Oh, absolutely. This term tolerance, they have to get rid of that. Use an Arabic term.
Yes. Arabic is something sublime word. They have got it, and we use it. And hope we'll have more chances to speak. I'm sure that the 1 hour or 2 hours, it won't be enough to tell the story, long journey to Islam and journey in Islam. Thank you for joining us this evening, and hope we'll have more chance to meet together.
Inshallah. And then someday you should have an interview with Samira Saidi.
Yeah, inshallah.
She is an incredible person.
Inshallah. She is writing an article for us for the matrilineal, as you know.
Okay, so fi aman Allah.
Amanillah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.